Today's episode of the Wealth Cafe is something I might get a little bit of heat for, and that is talking about retiring early. Now, if you remember, this whole concept of the FIRE movement, financially independent, retire early, had a big following for a period of time because it talked all about the idea of retiring essentially in your 30s and 40s, was what a lot of the people in that movement were doing. And during that time period, what you would do is you would save as much money as possible and really scrimp on how you were living. A lot of these people were living in tiny homes or were nomading and didn't have one place they were living in. And the whole goal was that you were saving as much as possible for you to retire early and not have to be working. And when I can give you estimates from what I've done from research, is that people were trying to save between 50 and 70% of their income for down the road. It makes sense, right? I mean, if you're going to be retired for 60, maybe even 70 years in some cases, if you're to live to 100, which isn't that far off base these days, you're going to need a good chunk of money in order to live for that long and not fear running out of money. Now we've seen a bit of a shift when I'm working with clients. We'll be sitting down to do a financial plan, and I always ask people a couple of questions. I always ask them what they think their full retirement age is for Social Security benefits. For most people, if you were born after 1960, it is actually 67, not 65. This is a big common misconception people have. So a lot of people will say 65, and then I ask them what they plan to do for the 2 years they wouldn't be fully covered by Social Security. Are they trying to take it early? What is their thought process here? And then we dive into the concept of, well, when would you realistically like to retire? And I see several groups of people, and they say, I want to retire yesterday if I could, aka as soon as possible. The people that say normal retirement age, that 67 you talked about sounds good, or people that never want to retire. Those are kind of the three main buckets that I see when working with clients. And today we're going to focus on those people who say, I want to retire as soon as possible. It's interesting. A common theme I see is people picking 50. I don't know if they like the round number, they think it sounds good. 50 is the big one that comes up when I say, okay, other than retiring today, if you could, what's a realistic number? And a lot of times they say this 50. And this is a hard thing to achieve. I'm going to be so honest. And today I want to unpack some of the things that go into having this early retirement lifestyle. And I say this because a lot of people expect the numbers to just work out. And the reality behind retiring early is some of the lifestyle choices that you have to make now. So the first of which is you have to decide what is the give and take here, right? Are you willing to give up certain things now in order to have that future and to not be working? And what I find is a lot of people are like, no, I want to travel now. I want to own a home. We want to put the kids through college, but we also want to retire early. That is a lot of things that you are trying to get your money to do. And I'm not saying it can't be done. I would never say that. With proper planning and if we can really get nitty gritty, we can hopefully get those numbers to work. However, there might be things you have to give up in the short term in order to achieve that in the long term. So I always ask people, rank those priorities for me, right? Is our number one priority retiring early? Or is it putting the kids through college? Or is it buying a home? Or is it your travel? And we have to kind of rank these things and see what we can fulfill first. And it might mean taking less trips now so that you can have that financial freedom later. And you know what? This episode is not meant to judge. This is all about facts. For some people, they sit there and they really hate their jobs and the work that they are doing and lo would love to do everything they can to get out of it as soon as possible. I understand, right? You just need that break or that time away, and you just want to leave the corporate world in any way possible. It happens, right? Then the question comes into play of what are you willing to do? And if we go back to the talk about the FIRE movement, I mentioned that 50 to 70% of income people are saving. That could potentially be what you need to save in order to make these numbers work. Keep in mind, not only do you not have money coming in for most of those years, you're also spending money in order to live. You're still young enough where you will be very healthy. You'll probably want to travel, explore, spend time with friends and family, right? Really enjoy your life. That can get expensive. So we need to understand what type of lifestyle you want to be living during that time period. Also, we need to keep in mind the fact that when you are stepping away from the workplace like this, re-entering can be pretty difficult, right? I see a lot of people who try to take breaks or sabbaticals, and that's one thing if it's for a shortened period of time, but it's another if you try to go back into the workplace 20, 30 years later, if you realize, oh my goodness, I'm going to run out of money. The other thing to consider is you might not be in a health standpoint where you can. It's not exactly easy. I always think of, I still have one remaining grandparent, and she's almost 100 years old. If she had to, I don't think she's jumping to go back to work anytime soon. And so these are things to consider, right? Is that if you start to run out of money or fear that you do, is it even going to be an option to re-enter the workplace? Going alongside of this whole conversation around health, we need to keep in mind for your healthcare costs, right? If you don't have an employer whose plan you're on, you're going to have these costs that are out of pocket. Also, during pre-retirement years, a lot of this has changed and become more accessible now because you can go on to the affordable healthcare plans that are offered in each state, so that is an option. But this is something you're going to have to pay for and consider out of pocket. And we also need to plan for down the road when during retirement, you have those health costs that are rising as you age, and that could really eat into a lot of the money that you are setting aside. Now, longevity is it's real, right? As I mentioned before, you could be living off of this money for easily 40, 50 years, depending on, how healthy you are, how active you are, and what type of quality of life are you going to have during that time. That's really determined by this. So I always ask people to step back and weigh the pros and cons of what do you want now versus what do you want life to look like down the road. And so we try to find that balance and that sweet spot, right? So I will sit there and we'll open up a client's financial plan and I'll say, hey, here's what it looks like if you retire 5 years later, 10 years later. Keep in mind, if we go back to that 50 number, the other thing we're looking at in a financial plan is that if you're 50, touching your retirement assets isn't really a great option, right? You'll hit penalties because you haven't reached 59 and a half. So you really need to focus on, are you saving enough in taxable investments or anything outside of retirement accounts to ensure that you won't have to tap into these things early? Touching your social security won't really be an option as well. And so you need to put a lot of emphasis in planning on those 10 to 15 years before you can tap into retirement resources. This is something that a lot of people then don't think of, especially if they want to retire pre-social security or pre-full retirement age. There's some intricacies in planning that has to go into this. So as you're putting that recommended 50 to 70% away, you need to be mindful of where you are investing and putting all of that money. And that's something you need to work with your financial advisory team, and your wealth management team on to make sure that you are set up for this. The other thing is when we talk about retirement, and this is something I want you to consider in your own life, it can look really different. And to tell you a little story about it, I had a client, we were working on her financial plan, and she told me she wanted to retire at her full retirement age, so 67, based on her birth year. And I said, great, tell me more about what retirement looks like to you. And I always talk about retirement in these two different parts. The first part is when you're healthy, you're loving life. What are all the things that you want to be doing? And the second part is when, unfortunately, your health is declining, and that's a separate conversation. But to focus on her part one of retirement, I talked to her about what do you want that to look like? And she said, I love to have all different types of crafts, and I'm a really creative hobby person. I said, that's amazing. I love it. And so her dream is for retirement is she wants to start her own storefront down the shore and be able to sell everything that she creates. Well, there's potential there for her to be earning money, right? That's the hope from her business that she'll be starting. So she'll need money to start the business, and she'll also need to consider the fact that she might make money from this, both part of her financial plan. And so that's a different form of retirement. Retirement means something different to everyone. So when you sit here and look at when you want to retire and also what that retirement looks like, it's going to be different for everyone. And so early retirement for you might mean I don't actually fully want to retire. I just want to step out of what I'm doing now. Maybe it's a full career change. Maybe you want to work for yourself, start your own business, open up your own craft shop down the shore. These are all different possibilities. And so, although the FIRE movement became a very strict idea around what that meant, it's really evolved and changed. And retiring early can be complex, and it's something you really need to plan for. It has to be strategic, it has to be intentional. So, if this is something you are thinking of, I really encourage you to either reach out to myself and we can start talking about a financial plan for you, or you can work with your own financial team and make sure you're asking them and make sure you really communicate to them when you want to retire, what that retirement lifestyle looks like, so they can help you best plan for those moments. The key to any of this is really doing your planning, communicating, and being honest about what you want this lifestyle to look like. And keep in mind, what are you willing to sacrifice now to have a different lifestyle down the road? I'd love to tell people and say, hey, yes, of course, you can spend as much money as you want right now and down the road still be able to retire. That's not realistic unless you are making an exorbitant amount of money, and if that's the case, that's a different conversation. But for a majority of people, it's going to look a little different. And it's something that needs to be planned for and it needs to be strategic. So I hope this was helpful. I hope this gave you some eye-opening questions on what it really means to retire early and the truth behind it, right? It's not exactly as easy as the FIRE movement made it sound, of just go and save all your money and retire whenever you want to and as soon as you can. It's strategic and it's planned. Thank you so much for listening to this week's Wealth Cafe episode, and I cannot wait to see you next week. Make sure you are subscribed to our channel so that way you get all of your episodes right to your inbox and the notification for it, and we'll see you next time.